Chapter 1, Dead Air. The static was louder tonight. Mara leaned closer to the shortwave radio, adjusting the dial with slow precision. The storm outside lashed against the cabin walls like claws dragging across rotted wood, and every so often, thunder cracked like distant gunfire. The radio whined, a garbled voice slipping in, then out, like a breath underwater. All frequencies. This is Station 13. If you're hearing this, don't come back. Mara froze. That voice wasn't part of any known station. Not one she'd ever found across the airwaves in the 2 years she'd been here. 2 years alone. 2 years since the world had gone quiet. She scribbled a note in her logbook, trembling slightly. 11:23 p.m. Unknown voice on 13.55 megahertz. Warning transmission. The radio crackled again. Not just sound this time. A scream. Short. Cut off. Almost wet. Then a whisper, barely audible, crawling into her ears. She's listening. The power flickered. The storm grew worse, but the radio was silent now. Dead air. Chapter 2. The signal fades. The silence in the cabin pressed down like an unseen weight. Mara's breath was shallow, her fingers still poised over the dials of the radio, as if waiting for some new transmission to break through. The storm outside howled, sending gusts of wind slamming against the windows. But the radio was still. Not a whisper, not a crackle, just the hum of the storm and the tick of the clock on the wall. She sighed, frustrated. The storm was probably messing with the frequencies, maybe even causing interference. It wasn't the first time the weather had played tricks on her, but something about the voice, about the scream. She reached down for the notebook where she'd written her earlier entry, reviewing it in the dim light. The message, though fragmented, was unsettling. If you're hearing this, don't come back. The words repeated in her mind, almost like a warning she couldn't quite grasp. Who had it been? Where was it coming from? The voice had seemed so real, so close. Mara rubbed her temples and stood up, shaking the lingering unease off as best she could. The cabin was small, just one room with a wood stove, a cot in the corner, and a rickety desk cluttered with maps, radio equipment, and old notebooks. In the center was the radio, a relic she had salvaged during her early days here. It was nothing special, a basic shortwave model that connected her to whatever fragments of the world were still out there. Or at least that was the idea. It had been 2 years since the last signal came in. 2 years since the world went dark. The broadcast from Station 13 had been one of the first warnings, followed by a sudden dead zone. Everything just stopped. She walked to the small window, peering out into the darkness. The storm had grown stronger, and the trees swayed violently in the wind. The sky was an angry black, split only by occasional bursts of lightning that lit up the landscape for a fraction of a second. Mara stared at the trees for a long moment. The woods were alive in their own way, but that wasn't what bothered her. It was what might be waiting there, hidden just beyond her sight. The first few months had been the hardest. In a world where no one answered the calls anymore, where every attempt to reach another human being fell into an abyss of silence, Mara had learned to adapt. She rationed supplies, maintained her radio setup, and stayed out of the woods as much as she could. The forest was full of strange noises, groaning branches, shifting ground, things that seemed wrong. She'd learned to trust her instincts, and yet, the chill creeping into her bones had nothing to do with the storm. Mara turned away from the window and approached the stove. The fire was dying, and she added a few more logs to the embers. The flames crackled as they caught, casting flickering shadows across the room. She grabbed a can of beans from the small shelf and set it on the stove. She needed to eat something to calm her nerves, but the hunger seemed distant, overshadowed by the unsettling feeling that gnawed at her. Sitting down, she fumbled with the can opener, her mind still reeling from the transmission. Station 13. There was no Station 13 listed in the emergency frequency charts. Mara had checked them dozens of times. There were stations for various regions, emergency broadcasts, weather reports, distress calls, but there was no Station 13. The call had been strange from the start, but now it felt like it was something far worse than just interference. She glanced at the radio again. It was waiting patiently, too patiently. The storm raged on outside, but Mara's focus shifted back to the radio. The old equipment looked almost like a relic now, something left behind in the wake of civilization's collapse. But she'd made it her mission to reach out to any surviving signal. She refused to believe that everyone was gone. "Come on," she muttered to herself. "There has to be something." Her fingers found the dial, and she began to twist it slowly, each click taking her deeper into static-filled frequencies. She turned the knob past the frequencies she knew, past the emergency channels, past the military distress calls. Nothing but static. Then, as she turned further still, there it was again. The voice. "Can't stop it. Don't listen to her." Mara's heart raced. This time, the transmission was clearer, but it still wasn't enough. The message was fragmented, as if the words were being pulled apart by some unseen force. Her mind scrambled, trying to piece it together. Was it a warning? A plea? The voice? It was so distorted, but there was a trace of something familiar about it. "Who are you?" she whispered aloud, her fingers freezing on the dial. The voice sputtered, as if it had heard her. Then a sudden thud. The radio crackled violently, and for a moment, the signal disappeared entirely. The sudden silence was deafening. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Was it over? A noise from outside, a soft, almost imperceptible rustle in the woods, made her stiffen. Her heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen, her eyes flicking nervously toward the window. Nothing. Another rustle. Closer this time. She could swear she saw the trees moving, their shadows flickering like something or someone was out there. She swallowed hard and rose from her seat, walking cautiously toward the door. She grabbed the rifle from its resting place on the wall, checking the chamber, ensuring it was loaded. It was her only line of defense. A low, guttural groan came from the woods. It sounded wrong, unnatural. Mara's pulse quickened. She didn't know what it was, but she knew she didn't want to find out. The radio buzzed again, this time with more urgency. The voice was back, and it was louder, more insistent. "She's coming for you," it said, almost as if it were warning her specifically. "Don't let her in. Don't let her in." Then a click. Mara's hand trembled as she shut off the radio. The silence felt like a relief, but it only lasted for a moment. The storm outside seemed to pick up again, the wind howling and the trees creaking under the pressure. She needed to know what was happening. The voice, the warning, she had to find out where it was coming from, who it was. But the storm was too fierce, the woods too dangerous. Mara glanced back at the door, the rifle clenched in her hands. She couldn't just sit here and wait for something to happen. With a deep breath, she set the rifle aside, grabbed her emergency pack and stuffed it with supplies: flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and of course her notebook and pen. The transmission had said not to come back, but Mara wasn't the type to run away from a mystery. If someone, or something, was trying to reach her, she couldn't ignore it. She had to find the source of the signal. Chapter 3. The Forest Beckons. The storm was a monstrous thing, a swirling fury that seemed to want to swallow the earth whole. Mara gripped her pack tightly as she opened the cabin door, the wind nearly knocking her back as it roared in. She pulled the hood of her jacket tight around her face and stepped out into the night. The forest was darker than usual, the trees standing like towering giants, their branches like gnarled fingers stretching out to block the moonlight. The rain was coming down in sheets, stinging her face and blurring her vision. But the storm didn't. Chapter 4. The Tower. The light flickered like a heartbeat in the dark, a pale, sickly glow rising just above the tree-line. Mara moved carefully, ducking low as she neared its source. Her boots sank into the muddy trail, every step muffled by the sodden forest floor. The voices had stopped, but the forest was far from silent. The trees creaked as if whispering to each other, and occasionally, something shifted in the shadows with a wet, dragging sound. The light came from an old broadcast tower. It stood crookedly in a clearing, tall, rusted, skeletal. At its base was a small structure, more bunker than building, half buried by earth and moss. The light pulsed from within, shining weakly through the single cracked window. Mara crouched at the tree line, staring. This hadn't been on any of her maps. She'd searched this area before. She was sure of it, but the tower had never been here. And yet now it stood before her. Real. Tangible. Wrong. She approached slowly, rifle raised. The forest around her felt like it was holding its breath. Her boots squelched through the mud as she crossed the clearing. The wind had died. The storm was eerily quiet now. The only sound the buzzing of old electronics from the building. She pressed herself to the wall just beneath the window. Peeking inside, she saw a narrow room lined with dust-choked equipment. A bank of old monitors flickered on one side, their screens showing nothing but static. In the center of the room sat a radio console, its dials glowing faintly red. And sitting before it, slumped in a metal chair, was a figure. Mara's breath caught in her throat. The person was still, deathly still. A pair of headphones rested crookedly on their head, and wires trailed from their body like vines. It was impossible to tell how long they'd been there. Their skin was pale, grayish, stretched taut over bone like wax. She moved around to the rusted door and pushed gently. Creaked open. The smell hit her immediately. Mildew, rust, and something far worse. Decay. She stepped inside, swallowing back the bile rising in her throat. The air was heavy and electric, and the closer she got to the console, the more she could feel it thrumming beneath her skin, like 1,000 voices trying to press through. The figure didn't move. Mara reached out slowly, fingers brushing the cold plastic of the headphones. As she pulled them off, the body sagged, crumpling slightly in the chair. The sound from the headphones was nothing but white noise, until it wasn't. A voice. "Welcome back, Mara." She dropped the headphones, heart lurching into her throat. The voice was hers. She backed away, eyes wide, staring at the console. The screen now displayed a series of numbers and waveforms, all shifting erratically. The dials began turning on their own. Static screamed from the speakers. Then a burst of clarity. "Don't let her in." The same phrase, again and again, over and over until the voice was distorted, stretched into something monstrous. She stepped toward the monitors, watching as the static began to form shapes, faces, melting into each other. One of them looked like the figure in the chair. Another looked like her. She turned to the wall where an old map had been pinned, one she hadn't seen before. It showed the entire region, but it was wrong. Towns that didn't exist, roads that led nowhere, and drawn in thick black ink was a crude circle surrounding the forest she had entered. Scrawled beside it, "Containment Zone. Do not transmit. Do not return." Mara backed away from the map, her pulse a thudding drum in her ears. She had walked into something ancient, something still listening. The radio screeched again, then fell silent. A knock at the door. 1, 2, 3. Slow. Rhythmic. Mara turned toward the sound, raising her rifle. Her flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering against the cold wall. The doorknob jiggled. Then a voice from outside. "Mara, let me in." Her blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human anymore. It mimicked the tone and cadence of her own, but with something added, something hollow and hungry. "I've come back, just like you wanted." Another knock, more insistent this time. Then, a whisper from behind her, from inside the room. She spun. Nothing, but the corpse in the chair was gone. The headphones lay on the floor, still humming softly. The console had gone dark. Another knock, then scratching, something sharp against wood. The door trembled. Mara bolted for the window and climbed through, landing hard on the wet ground outside. She didn't look back. She ran. Chapter 5, Static Dreams. Mara didn't remember how long she ran, only the rain lashing her face and the pulse of blood in her ears. The forest was alive around her, branches clawing at her jacket, thorns tearing at her legs. The light of the tower vanished behind her, swallowed by the trees. She didn't stop until she collapsed on tools, Chapter 6. The Black Loop. Mara stood up slowly, swaying as the world settled around her. The woods were gone. The tower, the mud, the wind. They had all vanished as if peeled away from reality like film burning in reverse. What remained was a long, dark hallway stretching endlessly in both directions, lit only by a pale fluorescent flicker that seemed to come from nowhere. No sound, no wind, no warmth. She turned slowly, trying to get her bearings. The ground was smooth, too smooth. Not stone, not metal. Just black, like walking on polished void. She looked down at the radio in her hand. It was different now. Heavier, cold, covered in scratches that hadn't been there before, and something else. Names etched into its metal casing, carved deep and violently. Her eyes passed over unfamiliar ones. Elaine, Kay. Rourke, Noah, Celine, until she found her own. Mara. She dropped the radio. It didn't clatter. It didn't even make a sound as it hit the floor. It just sat there, humming quietly. And then came the footsteps. Slow, measured. Bare feet slapping gently on the black floor from somewhere down the hall. She drew the rifle, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard she thought her bones would crack from the pressure. "Who's there?" she called out. The footsteps stopped. Then a whisper. "Don't point that at yourself." Mara froze. "What?" She looked at the rifle. Her arms. They were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was weight. The barrel of the gun was rising, turning. Slowly, irresistibly, toward her own head. She screamed and forced it down, as if fighting invisible strings. The metal resisted, like something was guiding her hands against her will. The voice whispered again. "You brought it here. Now it won't leave. Not until it finishes recording." The lights above her flickered violently. Suddenly, ahead in the corridor, one of the fluorescent lights burst, and from the darkness beneath it, a figure stepped out. It was her. Not a reflection. Not a hallucination. Another version of herself. Dirty, blood-soaked, her face hollow, eyes gone completely black. She moved with jerking, unnatural motion, limbs swaying like a marionette with broken strings. Mara backed away, raising the rifle again. "Stay back." The thing that wore her face didn't respond. It just stared, and smiled, and spoke in her voice. "You left the door open. That's all it takes. One signal, one invitation." Then it lunged. Mara fired. Once, twice. The sound didn't echo, it didn't make any sound at all. The bullets passed through it like smoke. She turned and ran. The hallway stretched infinitely in front of her, no matter how fast she moved. Doors began to appear on either side, small metal ones with no handles. Some had numbers etched above them. Others had names. She passed one marked, K. Rourke, last broadcast, December 7th, 28. Then another, Elaine Sumner, reception failure. And another, its name scratched off, marked only with the words, "Do not answer." She skidded to a stop as the final door loomed before her. This one was wooden, old, rotting. Carved into it in shaking script were the words, "Station 13." She could hear voices behind it, hundreds of them. Some screamed, some cried. One was humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. Another whispered her name over and over again like a chant. Mara, Mara, Mara. Her breath came in short gasps as she reached for the handle. The hallway behind her grew cold, and she heard the scraping of fingernails on glass. The creature, her double, was coming again. She didn't think. She opened the door and stepped through. Chapter 7. The room with no broadcast. She found herself standing in a room that looked eerily familiar. It was her cabin, or at least a copy of it. Everything was the same, the desk, the stove, the window, the shortwave radio. But everything was wrong too. The shadows were too deep. The walls seemed to breathe, ever so slightly. And outside the window was nothing but gray fog, swirling slowly like a living thing. The radio was on, crackling. Mara stepped toward it, the hair on the back of her neck standing straight up. The frequency read 13.55 megahertz, just like before. The signal was steady now, clear, and it was her voice again. But this time she wasn't speaking. She was screaming, a long, choked, blood-curdling scream, repeating. Chapter 8, Loopback. The scream faded into a thin, high-pitched tone that dug into Mara's skull like a drill. She staggered back from the radio, hand pressed against her ear. The sound wasn't just in the air. It was inside her, vibrating through her bones. Then it stopped. The room went dead quiet. No wind, no static. Even her breathing sounded muffled, like she was underwater. She turned toward the door. It was gone. In its place, a blank wall. Her stomach twisted. She was trapped. Again, the radio buzzed to life. This time, it spoke not in her voice, but in a flat, mechanical tone. Recording error. Signal not aligned. Begin reset. A faint chime followed the message, like an old dial-up modem trying to connect. Mara stepped back, shaking her head. No reset. The machine didn't care. Reset initiated, syncing previous iterations. Stand by. The lights dimmed. The fog outside the cabin grew denser, pressing up against the window like it wanted in, like it was watching. And then the door returned, but now it was open. Beyond it, pitch black. Something stepped through. A child, maybe 10. Thin, barefoot, skin pale as paper. Its head tilted slowly, like it didn't quite understand how to move its body yet. Its eyes were shut, but its mouth was open in a silent scream. Mara stood frozen. She knew that face. No, she whispered. That's not possible. The child opened its eyes. They were empty sockets, but behind them, movement, like something writhing just beneath the surface. It pointed at her with one trembling finger. You're the signal now, it said, and then it smiled. A jagged, too-wide thing that cut across its face like a broken zipper. Mara backed into the desk, grabbing the radio. She didn't know why, instinct, maybe. As soon as her hand touched the dial, it lit up again, and the voice changed. She's in the airwaves now. She's wearing you. You let her in when you listened. The child began walking toward her. Stop, she screamed, but it didn't. Kept coming. The lights flickered. The floor trembled. The radio in her hand pulsed with energy, and her mind was suddenly filled with images, too many to process. People tuning in, faces contorted in terror, radios bursting into flame, entire towns sitting silently at their sets, waiting for voices that never came back. A world of ghosts, a broadcast that could never be stopped, and all of it centered on her. Please, she whispered. What do you want? The child stopped just inches away, and for the first time, its voice was soft. It doesn't want. It listens. And now, you're the loudest voice in the dark. And with that, it lunged. Mara screamed, but there was no sound. Darkness swallowed everything. Chapter 9. Signal resumed. She woke in her cabin. Rain tapped gently against the window. The radio sat on her desk, humming quietly. The stove was warm. Her notebook lay open, and her last entry stared up at her. 11:23 p.m. Unknown voice on 13.55 megahertz. Warning transmission. She stood slowly, disoriented. Was it a dream? She turned toward the window and froze. In the distance, far beyond the trees, a red light blinked at the top of the broadcast tower. The one that wasn't supposed to exist. The one she'd destroyed. Her legs moved on their own. She walked to the radio, sat down, reached for the dial, and then she heard it, her own voice. This is Mara Laurent, broadcasting from the edge of the zone. If you're hearing this, don't come back. Epilogue, dead frequencies. They say there are places in the woods where the air buzzes, and radios pick up signals that shouldn't exist. They say sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear a woman's voice repeating the same message over and over, like a prayer lost in static. Don't come back. Don't let her in. They say that if you tune in for too long, you never stop broadcasting, and eventually you become the voice on the other end of the line. The last signal. The storm didn't come with thunder, It crept in silently, like it was watching. No warning, no crack of lightning, just a slow gathering of clouds overhead, thickening until the sky was a bloated bruise, swollen with unshed rain. Mara Laurent stood barefoot on the porch of the observation cabin, a chipped enamel mug warming her palms. Her breath fogged the air in quiet clouds. Down the slope, beyond the steep ridge of pine trees, the land disappeared into a blanket of fog. The forest below moved strangely in the stillness, branches twitching, not from wind, but from something else, something quieter, deeper. She took a slow sip of coffee. Cold. The radio inside crackled again. Mara turned, stepping back through the warped doorframe into the narrow, wood-slat interior. The stove hissed and ticked. The air held a chill even when the fire was burning. The place had the smell of soaked wood, dried blood, and old static. She crossed to the desk in the far corner, where a battered shortwave transceiver waited. It was military-grade, designed to pick up everything from encrypted border chatter to distant, decaying signal debris from other continents. She had been posted here 7 months ago as a civilian contractor, tasked with cataloging abnormal frequencies in the uninhabited sector near the former Canadian border. 7 months. No official orders since the 3rd. No pickup. No contact from base camp. The last satellite ping she'd received was 2 months ago. A single-line text over narrowband. Do not respond. Stay off 13.55 megahertz. At the time, she had no reason to tune there. Now she did. The dial was still set where she'd left it the night before, sitting coldly on 13.55 megahertz, a frequency she hadn't dared touch before last night. But it had come to her. The signal had bled into her station from somewhere local. Now it was back, crackling, shifting, a low whine built underneath the static, rising and falling like something breathing. She adjusted the gain. Then, a voice. Clear. Closed. Station 13. If you're hearing this, don't come back. Please. Mara blinked. She reached for the mic but stopped. Something about the voice had been strange. Too near, like it hadn't traveled at all. She hit record. This is observation post V17. Identify your signal. Repeat. Who is this? Silence. Then, in the background of the static, a dry whisper. A child's voice, repeating something over and over, out of phase with reality. She turned up the gain. Don't let her in. Don't let her in. Don't let her in. Mara leaned back slowly. Her hand reached for the logbook. She scribbled. 13.55 megahertz. Unauthorized broadcast detected. Local origin suspected. Child whispering layered under primary signal, potential hallucination? She tried the emergency uplink again. Nothing. Just that soft, pulsing breath beneath the static. She didn't sleep. The fog deepened overnight, pushing against the windows like wet cotton. The air inside the cabin tasted metallic. The wood walls creaked with tension. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the radio hissed and clicked off again, just like the night before. That never happened. The transceiver had its own backup capacitor. No search, no reason for failure. She stared at it until the sun rose, her mug cold in her hand, the logs on the stove reduced to char and memory. By morning, she made a decision. Log entry day 213, leaving post to trace source of 13.55. Cabin status, locked. Coordinates mapped. Taking rifle, recorder, backup transceiver. The trail down the mountain was older than memory. Ferns overtook what had once been a service road. Tree limbs reached low as if trying to hold her back. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. No birdsong, no insects, no wind. Mara stopped mid-hike, ears pricked. There it was again. A low-frequency hum, too steady for anything natural. Electrical. She adjusted her handheld radio. 13.55 megahertz came alive. You brought her with you, Mara. She froze. She's following. The voice was her own. Exactly her own. Not a recording, an echo. She turned. She turned in a slow circle, the windless air pressing against her skin like damp velvet. Nothing moved. The forest was silent, but the hum was louder now, pulsing from the ground up, like it lived inside the earth itself. She should have turned back. Every cell in her body screamed to retreat, to reset, to pretend she'd never heard the signal. But Mara was stubborn, and stubborn people don't listen to survival instincts until it's too late. Another 30 minutes down the trail, and the woods abruptly changed. The trees stood too still, the moss too uniform. A perfect silence filled the gaps where life should have been. Mara found herself at a clearing she didn't recognize, not marked on any of her maps. And in the middle of it stood a tower, steel, hollow, covered in rust and vines, but unmistakably operational. No ID tags, no maintenance signs, just cables trailing down into the earth like roots. She wasn't alone. A man stood at the base, facing away from her, staring up. Mara froze, instincts kicking in. "Hello?" she called. The man didn't move. He wore a dark jacket with no insignia. His head was shaved, pale, still, too still. She approached slowly, rifle at low ready. "Sir, this is a restricted zone. I need you to identify yourself." The man turned. His face was blank, mouth slack, eyes entirely black like deep ink pools. He opened his mouth and spoke in her voice. "You shouldn't have come back, Mara." The signal buzzed to life in her transceiver, screaming, not from him, from her own mouthpiece. She dropped it. The man collapsed like a puppet cut from strings, hitting the moss with a soundless thud. His body began to break apart, not like flesh, but like ash falling inward. The signal surged. "We're always broadcasting. You just weren't listening before." She ran. No direction, just away, back into the trees, heart pounding against her ribs, lungs burning. The tower humming behind her like a predator drawing breath. Branches clawed at her. Roots grabbed her boots. The woods seemed to warp and bend. Trees crowding closer as if trying to close in and seal her inside. Then light. She stumbled through a line of trees and saw it. A cabin. Her cabin. But it wasn't. The windows were wrong. The paint was fresh. There were no logbooks inside. Still, it looked like hers. Down to the mug on the desk. And there, the radio. It buzzed with life. "She's almost here," it whispered. "She's under the static. Let her speak." Mara backed away, but the cabin wouldn't let her leave. Every door opened to the same room. She circled the walls for what felt like hours, but the windows just showed different angles of the same tower in the distance. Finally, she collapsed into the chair, staring at the radio. The dial spun by itself. 13.55 megahertz. The voice came again. Soft, familiar. "Do you remember the blackout, Mara? When you stopped hearing from anyone?" She did. "You were the last one alive in the zone." A beat of silence. "Now you're the first one back." She woke on the floor. Night had fallen. The fire was out. The radio was dark. She checked her pack. Her rifle was missing. Her recorder was melted. No tracks outside. Not even hers. Mara left the cabin and headed toward the ridge, toward the original outpost. And there it was again, the tower. Always there. Always watching. And behind it, something was moving in the fog. Tall. Slender. Humming. The radio clicked on in her bag. "Welcome to Station 13. We've been waiting." The last signal. The fog never lifted. It swelled and throbbed around Mara as she hiked toward the ridge, no longer sure if she was retracing her steps or walking in circles. Trees seemed to breathe. The air bent sound in unnatural ways. Branches snapped in one direction, but nothing was there when she turned. The tower, somehow, was always ahead of her, looming between trees, blinking red in the haze. She hadn't eaten in 20 hours. Her canteen was empty. The melted recorder in her pack was cold and damp, leaking acid that had burned a hole in the bottom seam. Her boots were soaked, and her rifle, still gone, felt like an amputated limb. Yet Mara kept going, because the signal was louder now. She didn't need the radio anymore. She heard it in her head, like a whisper between her own thoughts. Don't let her speak. Don't let her through. She crested a low hill and came to a set of mossy stairs leading downward. Concrete, unnatural, swallowed by the earth. A sign leaned against a stone post, half buried in vines. The letters had eroded, but she could just make out DPT of Broadcast Control. Facility V13A. Her breath caught. There were rumors of broadcast vaults, underground bunkers built during the Cold War to house frequencies deemed unstable. The kind of signals that caused seizures, hallucinations, even madness. Most had been decommissioned, or so she'd been told. Mara descended. The stairwell spiraled into the ground, cold and wet. Mold painted the walls in dripping streaks. After nearly 60 steps, she found herself before a thick steel door with an observation slit. Beyond it, darkness. She pushed the door. It groaned open. The facility was silent. A long hallway stretched ahead, lit by flickering emergency lights. The air was cold and dry, heavy with the scent of ozone. She passed closed doors labeled in faded paint. Studio, archive room, monitoring bay, containment chamber, restricted. One of them was open. She entered cautiously, hand on the grip of her knife. Inside, a control room. Old equipment buzzed faintly. A map of North America lit up on one wall, red pinpricks glowing at various locations. Some blinked rapidly. Others were steady. One pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, dead center on her current location. A console sat in the middle of the room, partially powered. On its screen, a single command prompt. Run broadcast test 13? Mara didn't touch it. Not yet. She moved to the desk and opened a nearby logbook. Most of the entries were technical. December 9th, 99. Signal maintained. Subject 1 still in isolation. Reports of self-replicating speech patterns. Technician Ruiz reassigned. January 12, 2000. Attempted full shutdown. Failed. Frequency reemerged through backup lines. Lockdown remains in effect. March 25, 2000. Subject has taken on vocal traits of operators. Containment compromised. Switching to passive surveillance. The last entry was written in what looked like dried blood. June 6, 01. She speaks in us now. We are all transmitters. Silence is no longer safe. Mara closed the book slowly. Her hands shook. A scream echoed down the hall. Not distant, not muffled. Close, right outside the room. She backed into a corner, knife raised, heart pounding. A shape passed the doorway, paused. Its shadow stretched into the room, longer than it should be, unnaturally thin. Then it moved on. She didn't breathe for a full minute. Later, how much later? She didn't know. Mara moved deeper into the facility. The signal had a gravity to it now, pulling her along the corridors like a tide. She passed through rooms full of dead monitors, old reel-to-reel machines playing nothing, and voice recorders warped from heat. And then she found the broadcast core. A large chamber, circular, walls lined with acoustic tiles. At its center, a tall glass booth, a soundproof chamber, stood like an altar. A microphone inside it glowed red. Above the booth, engraved in metal, transmission is transformation. The door to the booth was open. She stepped in. As soon as her boots crossed the threshold, the radio on her hip screamed to life. Welcome, Mara. We've been waiting. The door slammed shut behind her. The red light turned green. The microphone extended toward her with the slow inevitability of machinery that had been waiting a long time. It wasn't dusty. It wasn't cold. It looked used, fresh. She stared at it. Her reflection swam in the glass. But it wasn't quite her face. Not exactly. The version she saw had darker eyes, too dark, and lips moving ever so slightly, even though she remained still. A subtle vibration passed through the booth. She felt it in her teeth. The room beyond the glass remained dark. No movement, no sound, just her, and the mic, and the red light blinking above, now accompanied by a soft tone, like an old telephone line, left open too long. Then a click, and a voice. Begin your broadcast. It was the same voice from before, hers but off. as though time and static had stretched it. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came out. Her throat seized, dry as ash. She swallowed, tried again. "This is Mara Loran. V17 observation post." "Aye." The mic screeched. Then silence. Then another voice. Young, feminine, unknown. "No lies. Tell them the truth." Mara backed up into the booth wall. "What truth?" she whispered. But she already knew. It wasn't just the signal. It was her. She had heard it long before she arrived. In dreams. In flashes behind her eyes when she blinked too long. The voices didn't begin here, they had followed her. Or maybe they had started with her. The red light blinked faster. Then green again. And the voice spoke, different this time. A man's voice. Flat. Robotic. Transmission received. Transformation begins. The microphone retracted. And the glass of the booth fogged over. Not with condensation, but with words. Etched like breath frost on a window pane. Dozens. Hundreds. Names. Coordinates. Call signs. Fragmented messages. And in the center, 3 words repeated over and over in looping, jagged scrawl. "She is listening. She is listening. She is listening." Mara pressed her hands against the glass. The fog pulsed. Once, twice, and then something pushed back. A shape. Small hands. A child's silhouette formed in the fog. On the other side, and then her face. The same one from the tower field. The same one from the static dream. Her mouth opened. No sound. But Mara could read her lips. "Let me in." The lights in the booth died. She woke in darkness. No idea how much time had passed. Her head ached. Blood on her temple. Something had burst in her ears. Wetness on her neck. She was no longer in the booth. She lay on the floor of a different room. This one had no lights. Only the glow of dials. VU meters twitching faintly. A faint hiss filled the air. Radio static. But layered. Deep like oceanic pressure. Then a human voice. Real. Close. "Hey, hey, don't move." Mara bolted upright. A flashlight beam hit her eyes. Someone else. A man. Beard. Weathered face. Military jacket shredded in places. Dirt-smudged skin. "You're real," she gasped. "Yeah, as real as it gets down here." He helped her to her feet. His name was Jonas. He'd been part of a cleanup crew sent over 5 years ago. No one had come to get them. The team vanished one by one. "She took them," he said. He hadn't used the radios in weeks. "She listens through the signal. She gets inside you." Mara backed toward the wall. "You've heard her." Mara woke to silence. The first thing she noticed was how cold the air had become, as though the heat of the explosion, the frenzy of it all, had been sucked out of the world like air from a punctured balloon. She rubbed her arms, trying to rid herself of the chill, but the wind outside carried something strange, something wrong. It wasn't just cold, it was dead. There were no birds, no insects, no whisper of the forest. The hum of the radio was gone. She stood at the window and stared out at the fog. It wasn't thick, but it lingered, like a curtain, hanging between her and the world beyond. The trees were twisted into shapes that made her chest tighten. Her mind ran back to the last thing she remembered, being in the broadcast core. She had pressed the detonator. She had ended it. So why did it feel like everything was still spinning? She took a deep breath, willing the uneasy thoughts away. She checked the cabin. Everything was as it should be. The walls stood firm, the furniture in its usual place. Even the bed, though slightly askew from where she had left it, seemed undisturbed. Yet her skin crawled. The room felt like it was shrinking around her, the walls pressing in with every passing second. She stepped away from the window and grabbed her jacket from the chair, strapping her knife to her belt. It wasn't real, she told herself. None of it was real anymore. But then she saw the radio. It was on the small table by the fireplace, sitting like an old relic of a forgotten era. The radio was blinking. The tiny dial spun slowly, as though searching for a signal. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Shouldn't have been on. Her hand shook as she reached for it, her fingers brushing the cold plastic of the dial. It clicked once, twice, before settling on 13.55 megahertz. The signal. Her throat tightened. She ripped the battery cover off, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing in the empty room. But the batteries were missing. Then she heard it. The same voice, low, static-filled, but unmistakably hers. Mara! It was softer than before, a whisper buried beneath layers of static and crackling white noise. But it was her voice. She could feel it vibrating through her teeth. The radio hummed again, and the voice continued. You're still here. You never left. You cannot leave. She flung the radio across the room, crashed against the wall, but the voice didn't stop. It came from everywhere now, weaving itself into the fibers of the room, until it was as though the air itself was talking to her. We are waiting. You will come back. All of you will. Mara's vision blurred. The walls seemed to stretch outward, the floor buckling beneath her feet. She gasped for air, and suddenly, the room was too small, too tight. She stumbled back, her hand hitting the table. The radio was no longer on the floor. It was back on the table, its dial spinning of its own accord. 13.55 megahertz. Mara's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. Turn it off. Please stop. But the voice didn't listen. The voice never listened. She ran for the door. Outside, the forest was still there, its trees twisted in impossible shapes, stretching far above her, their branches like fingers reaching toward the sky. She took a few steps, but the feeling of the world closing in on her didn't ease. The fog, it never cleared. Mara's feet moved on their own. She had no choice but to follow the path that had been set before her. The silence that followed her, that gnawing feeling deep in her chest, was the only thing she could hear, louder than the voice, louder than anything else. It was her. It was the signal, and it was still inside her. The forest didn't feel real. The trees bent at strange angles, their bark peeling and twisted like melted wax. She passed through them as if they weren't even there, her feet moving faster than her mind could catch up. The world had become a maze. Every direction led her to the same place. Every step carried her forward into nothingness. And then she saw it again. The tower. It had changed. Larger, blacker, more like a monument than a machine. It loomed against the fog, a dark monolith rising into the sky. The blinking red lights had turned into a pattern, pulsing like a heartbeat, as though the tower itself was alive. Her legs moved without her, pulling her toward it, each step feeling more like a command than a choice. When she reached it, she froze. A door, a rusted door. It looked new, fresh, and yet she could feel it, the weight of something familiar, something that should have been buried. She opened it. Inside was the control room she had seen before, but it was different now. The equipment was newer. The screens were alive, flashing with patterns of static, fragments of faces. Voices, her own voice, echoing, over and over again. And in the center, a single glowing screen. It displayed a simple message. She is here. Mara swallowed hard. Something shifted behind her. A figure stepped into view, long and slithering, wrapped in the same fog that she had walked through. It was humanoid, but distorted. Too tall, too thin. Its eyes were black, empty, and when it opened its mouth, she heard the same voice. You will never be free, Mara. You are the signal. You always were. Her heart raced. The walls closed in again. The figure stepped closer, its shape flickering like an old VHS tape, every movement jerky and unnatural. Spoke again. You'll never leave because you never left. Mara took a step back, but it didn't matter. There was nowhere to run. The tower stretched out in all directions, a labyrinth with no exit. Why are you doing this? Mara gasped. Because you called us, the figure replied. You listened. You obeyed. We are all listening now. The words hit her like a slap. The realization crashed into her. I didn't ask for this. You never asked, but you heard it, and that was enough. Mara dropped to her knees. It wasn't just the tower. It wasn't just the signal. It was everything. Everything she had heard. Every whisper. Every crackle. The voice that had followed her. It was inside her. The figure reached out and placed a cold, long-fingered hand on her shoulder. "We are all connected, Mara. You will be one of us." Her body jerked as though struck by an electric current. The static that filled her ears intensified, so sharp it felt like shards of glass cutting into her skull. Her head throbbed. The voice in her mind was louder than it had ever been. The tower pulsed. It was waking up, and she was part of it now. The last thing Mara saw was the blinking light of the tower, filling her vision like a fire. The walls cracked, the air trembled, and then, as everything around her exploded in a shower of sparks and static, she was gone. Hours later, the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the misty forest. No one would ever know what happened. No one would remember the name Mara Loran. The tower stood alone, its red lights blinking in a perfect, rhythmic pattern. And from the silence that followed, a single message broadcasted across the empty airwaves. "We are always on air." When the relief unit from Sector Delta arrived 3 days later, they didn't expect to find much. The last ping from V-17's emergency beacon had burst like a dying breath across every tower in the northern grid. A short, sharp distortion. No voice, no signature, just a raw signal and the unmistakable hum of carrier tone 13.55 megahertz. The kind of tone that made men stop breathing mid-sentence. Lieutenant Rourke didn't want this assignment. He'd seen what happened at the V9 and V11 installations, how cleanup teams returned hollow-eyed, mumbling to themselves, or didn't return at all. He'd heard of the woman they all whispered about, a voice tech named Mara Loran, missing, presumed dead. What he hadn't heard, what no one ever put on paper, was what she'd been trying to silence. But now he stood at the edge of Tower V17, staring up at the monolith. It was wrong, twisted. The original tower schematics called for a structure no taller than 60 meters, surrounded by standard-issue fencing and power grids. What he saw instead was something else. Charred steel twisted into an unfamiliar shape. A spire almost blackened, still faintly steaming at its base. No fence, no cables, no access point. The forest around it was flattened, like it had been pushed down by a great weight. Birds avoided the air above it. In fact, nothing moved. Behind him, Sergeant Lee snapped another photo with the handheld recon cam. The image distorted immediately. "Same static corruption," she muttered. "That's the fifth lens. No good visuals. Whatever this thing's putting out is scrambling optics." Rourke frowned. "Infrared. Dead. It's like the air's frozen in there. Temp drops 5 degrees the second we step near the perimeter. Something's still alive in that thing. Alive." He hated the word, but she was right. As the team fanned out, searching for any remnants of the missing personnel, Lee circled back, holding a cracked audio recorder she found buried in the soil. "You'll want to hear this." She handed Rourke the headphones. Old-school plug-in model. Battery-powered. Safer that way. The tape hissed for a few seconds. Then came a voice. "This is Mara Loran, V17 Broadcast Core. It's awake now. It's in me. I am not me anymore. I don't know what I am." Pause. Then, whispering under her voice, "She is listening. Always listening. Don't speak. Don't speak into the air. She's made of language." Then static. The kind that felt wet. Rourke pulled the headphones off with a grimace. "Shut this place down. Now." Lee hesitated. "Sir." "Shut it down how?" Rourke looked back at the tower. The steel was still twisting. Just slightly. Not enough to see. But he could hear it. The sound of metal breathing. "We collapse it. Drop it into its own footprint. Thermal charges if we have to." "But what if it's not just the tower?" she asked quietly. "What if she's not in there anymore?" Rourke didn't answer. They set the charges at 1,400 hours. A perimeter of thermal columns. Rourke didn't want to risk wiring anything digital, nothing connected. Everything had to be analog, dumb tech, military surplus from decades ago. paper timers, hand triggers, glass fuses. The tower pulsed once, just as the last charge was set. Not visibly, but they all felt it. A deep bass note, as if some massive organ, deep in the earth, had struck a low, dissonant chord. Lee swore softly. It knows. Rourke didn't look at her. He just triggered the countdown. Clear the field. They evacuated to the ridge. Cameras set to record the collapse. At 0, the field bloomed in heat and light. The tower shuddered. And then, nothing. The charges blew. The earth split beneath them. But the tower? Still standing. Untouched. Except now, it was taller. That night, the camp went quiet early. No fires. No communications. Just darkness and distant hisses through portable radios no one had turned on. Rourke sat by the transport, staring at the sky. The stars above V-17 had changed. Rearranged somehow. A new constellation had formed. 3 stars in a triangle, blinking in perfect rhythm. Lee joined him without a word. Her eyes were darker than before. "There's something under it," she said. "I ran a resonance check after the charges failed. There's a cavity beneath the tower. Deep, unmapped. It's not just a spire. It's a transmission needle." "Into what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a CR. Lieutenant Rourke had seen a lot of strange things during his 12-year service in the Perimeter Corps. But this was something else entirely. V-17 didn't look bombed or sabotaged. It looked abandoned, unlived, and used, as if the entire structure had sat untouched for decades, even though the logs said the last personnel broadcast had gone out just 5 days ago. Rourke's boots crunched across loose gravel as he stepped out of the transport rover. The wind was dry. The air tasted of static. He tapped his helmet twice, testing the filters, and scanned the tree-line. Nothing moved. No animals. No sound. Not even birds. His comm buzzed. Reading 0 EM anomalies. No radiation spikes. That was Private 1 from the rear team. Good kid. First real deployment. Copy, Rourke replied, eyes narrowing. Sweep the tower first. I want all frequencies locked down before we go near the base interior. He turned to Sergeant Doss, the most seasoned vet in his 4-man squad. Anything? Doss just shook his head. Then he muttered, "Place feels wrong, like it's listening." Rourke didn't reply, because he felt it too. Inside the tower, the stairwell stretched up like a spinal column, rusted steel vertebrae curling toward the clouded sky. The elevator was dead, its panel black and crusted with salt. Rourke ran his glove across the walls. Flakes of white paint came off like dead skin. There was something off about the structure. No signs of combat, no bodies, just silence. They found the first message on level 3, written in oil-black ink on the wall above the stairwell. "You cannot kill a frequency when swallowed hard." "Is this paint?" Rourke sniffed the air. Metallic, sharp. "No," he said. "It's blood." The control room on level 9 was intact, but every console was fried. Screens shattered, tape recorders melted, and at the center of the room, facing the primary microphone, was a chair bolted to the floor. Leather restraints hung from the arms. Whoever had been stationed here had left in a hurry or been taken. There were marks on the floor, scratch grooves, desperate ones, as if someone had tried to crawl away while bound. Rourke crouched beside them and found a chipped ID badge wedged between the tiles. "Loran, Mara, comm operations." "Lieutenant," Doss called out, holding up a data cassette. "Found this lodged in the mic housing." Rourke turned it over. No labels, no markings, just a red dot burned into the plastic shell where a brand sticker used to be. He pocketed it. "We're leaving. I want a full perimeter lockdown and someone from Echo Psych Division on the next transport out here." Back at Temporary Field HQ, they played the tape. It started with static. Just 5 seconds. Then a voice. Female. Tired. Dry. Barely a whisper. "This is Mara Loran. I was wrong. I opened it. I opened her. I thought I could kill the signal. I thought..." Short burst of feedback. "But she used me. She was already inside. She is me. You can't hear her until she speaks your name. But once she does, pause, a long one, then the voice again. You start to hear her even when she's not talking. Then the mic hissed and something else bled through. A child's voice, faint and layered with distortion. "I see you, Rourke." The room went still. No one had said the lieutenant's name aloud during playback. "Turn it off," Rourke said, standing up sharply. "Burn the cassette." "Sir," when asked, I said burn it. No backups. They complied. But that night, in his tent, Rourke heard it again. Faint, in the air vent, in the silence. A whisper, like it was crawling through the frequency between moments. Rourke! He didn't sleep. The next day, a second tower activated. V12. It had been offline since 1996, but at 3:03, every screen in the northern grid lit up with the same sequence. 13.55 megahertz signal active. Status: broadcasting. Source: unknown. And the tape from V17 was found again. Despite being destroyed, identical copy. Same damage. Same red dot. Same voice. Across the perimeter, operators began hearing things. Not voices at first. Tones. A long, low hum that slid into the space between thoughts. The last signal. 3 days later. Northern Broadcast Grid Site V12. The signal never stopped. Since the tower at V12 came online, it hadn't paused, pulsed, or repeated. It was a constant drone, low, wideband, and impossible to isolate. Some called it a carrier wave. Others said it was a heartbeat. Rourke, now stationed at a decontamination camp 20 clicks north of V12, hadn't slept. Not really. He'd tried. Pills, isolation pods, even deep scrub EM shielding. But every time his mind drifted off, she crept in. At first, it was whispers, barely audible beneath the static hiss of white noise. Then it became language. Not words exactly, but impressions. Meaning pressed into the folds of his brain like fingerprints on clay. "You are already transmitting." He would wake up screaming, or not wake up at all. Sergeant Doss didn't believe in ghosts, but after losing 2 more men to signal interference, he had started carrying an old crucifix wrapped in copper wire. "It's not God I'm praying to," he told Rourke, voice hollow. "But maybe she hates symbols. Maybe it slows her down." Private One had gone silent. Literally. He hadn't spoken since day 2. Just wrote messages on scraps of paper with blocky handwriting. His last note was simple: "She's trying to come through me." Then he bit off his own tongue. He lived, but only barely. Rourke approved a medevac. One never made it to the chopper. His body was found sitting cross-legged under the comms dish. Eyes burned out, ears gone, skin white as bone. At command, General Roche reviewed the tower schematics for V12 and V17. Something didn't make sense. "These towers were built in the 70s, he said, pointing at the blueprints. "Cold War leftovers. Standard relay arrays. But look at this. What the hell is this array here?" He tapped a cluster of components on the revised digital scan. No one had answers. Not even the AI systems tasked with maintaining the grid recognized the structure. It looked like a circuit board grown from organic tissue. Veins instead of wires, nodes that pulsed like glands. Dr. Mara Laurent had signed the last update to the file before her disappearance. Mara L. // signal echo alpha. Activated. She had installed it, whatever it was. Back in the field, Rourke received a private transmission. Encrypted. Analog tape dropped by drone. It was from Echo Division, the classified R&D branch hidden beneath the Tower Defense Corps. The tape was labeled, for Rourke only, signal burst evidence. He inserted it into the last working portable tape player, put on his headset, and hit play. A voice crackled, but it wasn't Laurent this time. It was a man, British accent, calm. "You don't kill a signal, you overwrite it." The old languages knew this. They didn't ban her. They buried her under layers of sound. The chants, the bells, the old songs you can't forget. They were never worship. They were jamming signals. But someone has been digging. Someone opened the band again. There was a pause. Then, your name is already on her lips. Lieutenant, you need to find Site Zero. Before she completes the broadcast, the tape ended. Rourke sat in silence, fists clenched. Site Zero wasn't on any of the digital maps, but Rourke knew where to look. Old broadcast records, paper files, deep in the cold archive below Field Sector V1. He took only Doss and two others, Corporal Lin and Specialist Kita, a linguist with Echo Division clearance. They rode out in the storm, guided by compass and cassette. No GPS, no radios. Every signal could invite her. Every whisper might wake her further. Site Zero was buried under an abandoned church at the edge of what was once Pine Hollow Township. No one had lived there since 1962. As they stepped inside, Rourke felt the pressure instantly, like walking into deep water. The stained glass windows were melted. The altar was gone, replaced by a circular hole in the stone floor, rimmed with copper teeth. It wasn't a place of worship anymore. It was a